In 2023, the DRC filed a case against Rwanda in the African Court of Human Rights, alleging that Kigali violated the AU's Charter on Human and People's Rights through the alleged support of the M23 rebels. The M23 rebels have been responsible for the mass killing, mass displacement, destruction of schools, destruction of infrastructure, and looting. To discuss the implications of this case, that this case could have on human rights and justice on the continent, I'm now joined by Professor Frans Viljoen, who is a professor of international human rights law at the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. Professor Viljoen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. A very important case this will be. It's also the first interstate case at the African Court. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Yes, indeed. Maybe if I may, I'll say a word or two about the African Court. I don't think our viewers always understand these issues so well. We don't in South Africa particularly focus so much on the African Union. Just to say that this African Court has been in existence since 2006. It is based in Arusha in Tanzania. And it basically hears cases of individuals and NGOs complaining against their states. And then once they have exhausted all their local remedies at the national level, they can then bring the case to the African Court. 34 of the African Union's 55 member states have accepted this court's jurisdiction, and that includes South Africa. And obviously it includes also the Democratic Republic of Congo, and that it includes also Rwanda. So this then is the first time that one state brings a case against another state. We've had about 250 of these individuals bringing cases, but this is the first time when one state actually brings a case against another. So that's quite remarkable, and I think almost like a test case for this African Court on Human and People's Rights.
And if we had to use the benchmark of the 250 plus individual cases as well, how impactful is this African Court?
Yes, we have to concede, right? The first point, I suppose, is that because it's an African Union institution, it's an international court, it does not have a police force or an enforcement arm of its own. It cannot, like at the domestic level, someone cannot knock on a door and enforce a judgment. So that is a constraining factor. And that is true of all international courts, even the International Court of Justice. As we know, the International Court of Justice has given judgments, and we've seen, a country like Israel perhaps not complying with those judgments. So that is true also of the African Court, that often the judgments will not be enforced. How is it supposed to work? It is supposed to be the African Union Assembly, the leaders of the African Union, that bring pressure to bear on a state which does not comply with the judgments of the court, because this is a creation of the African Union, and it's the African Union that, in a sense, has to give it the political arm. Now, often states do comply voluntarily. We have good cases, for example, in Burkina Faso a few years back. There was an important case that found that the killing of an investigative journalist was a violation of the African Charter. There was no domestic remedy. And eventually, Burkina Faso reopened the proceedings, they paid compensation, and they changed the legal regime that was applicable. On the other hand, there are certainly also quite a number of examples of states that have not complied with these decisions. But we would hope to see the African Union taking stronger action. And maybe this case of the DRC against Rwanda is an opportunity for the African Union to show that it is much more concerned about the effective enforcement of this court's judgment. It could be a turning point, some of us hope, in the creation of a better enforcement regime of the African Court.
And Prof, while we're being hopeful as well, when one looks at what's been going on, particularly in recent months as well, kind of a war of words between heads of state, between the DRC, Rwanda, and of course also involving South Africa, because we had some of our countrymen from the SANDF who perished there too. It's caused quite a bit of conflict and tension, particularly between DRC, South Africa on one side and Rwanda on the other side. Now, if we don't have this enforcement arm, and we do already have a precedent of countries that don't comply with the court's decisions, how likely is it that we will find a positive outcome out of this case?
Yeah, no, it is true that we can be suspicious given that the nature of the conflict, right, and the kind of denials perhaps that we find also from the Rwandese side. But I would go back to that, the protocol, the legal instrument that the states have accepted. No one forced the DRC or Rwanda to accept the jurisdiction of the court. When they accepted the jurisdiction of the court, they bound themselves under the AU law, the African Union law, and under international law to comply. That's explicitly written there. They will comply. So if they do not, they are very clearly in violation. Sometimes the stakes are not so high, when it is one individual and it's a fair trial case. But in this case, the stakes will be so much higher that I think non-compliance will be immensely detrimental to the African Union and its own institution building process. For that reason, I think it will at the very least precipitate a very, very fierce debate within the African Union, and it will draw attention to the potential role of the court, and hopefully, and I think the indications are there, that there will be a majority of states in the African Union that will want to see, while we are assuming that the court will decide against, let's say, Rwanda. I mean, I'm just saying that for argument's sake. On the evidence, it does look like it's possible, and that this test case will really spur on the court to dig in its heels. No, not only the court, but the African Union and its political leadership.
Professor Viljoen, thank you so much for your insights and also just explaining the African court to us and our viewers as well.